So, as you've noticed, this is not Halo 3. Like I said at the end of my last video, I wanted to take a look at a game that I got during the Steam summer sale, and this is that game. So, what is this? Cloudpunk is what I can only describe as American truck simulator and a cyberpunk dystopia with a story thrown onto it. It was developed by Ion Lands and published by Maple Whispering Limited and was released back in April of this year on Steam and is supposed to get a console release later this year. I also want to preface this by saying this isn't going to be as in-depth as my Halo reviews because, well, spoiler alert, the gameplay is pretty simplistic. That and I have a lot more innate knowledge when it comes to the Halo games, so think of those more as deep dives into the games, and this is a general overview. Or something like that. I don't know, I may change the script later. Well, even if this is a less detailed review, we're gonna start things off as we always do. So the game uses voxel-style graphics, which, if you don't know what that means, it's basically like a bunch of little Minecraft blocks stuck together to form, well, pretty much everything. Buildings, cars, even the characters. Some of the characters look a little... yeah, they look a little bit weird, and you'll actually be face-to-face with them for a good bit of the game, though you do find yourself getting used to them over time. You can also look at the portraits that appear on the bottom of the screen when they're speaking to you, which look like they're being visually broadcasted over a CB radio. But what this game lacks in highly detailed models, though, it makes up for in lighting. The lighting is honestly incredible, which you kinda need in a cyberpunk game, especially with all that neon everywhere. There's just so many different light sources all working together, and some of them look better than some of the big budget games that have come out recently. Still, I think the voxel style is pretty damn charming, especially when you're driving through the city. Hell, when you're driving through the city, you hardly notice that it's voxel style at all, it's just done that well. Honestly, let me just talk about the city in general. It's big. It's split up into several instance districts, and different sections look distinct. The higher class areas are, well, they're higher up in the city, and they're closer to the spooky sci-fi clouds. The middle class ones are just above the regular clouds and have a few problems with flickering lights. And the lower class ones are below those clouds and right above the ocean. Yeah, the entire city is actually built in the middle of the ocean. Oh, did I also mention that in the lower neighborhoods, pieces of the city will just sort of collapse and fall into the water? Because that happens. But throughout all of these districts, there's one constant. Rain. Rain everywhere. All the time. There's only two places where it doesn't rain. The vents beneath the entire city, and the spire above the clouds. Honestly, this game does a really good job at making these zones feel distinct and encompassing what they're like. And that's not even getting into the sound. The sound of this game is pretty damn good. You'll almost always be hearing the sound of either cars, or hovers as they call them, flying by, people chattering in the streets, the rain falling, warnings that experiencing or playing jazz will get you killed, advertisements. It feels very cyberpunk. And then we've got the music. They really nailed the music here, and it really helps sell the cyberpunk setting that they've got. Really, all of the game comes together to sell the tone really well. The only thing I have to say about the sound is the voice acting.
What's wrong? Chemist controls are frozen, and the doors are locked. We can't even land.
It's not great. It's not really that it's bad, it's just not good. Some of the voice actors do sound good. I mean, Control's voice actor is really good, and some of the side characters are well voiced. Honestly, I don't even think a lot of it is on the actors. It sounds like a lot of them were either just not given any direction or given really poor direction. Which is a shame, since this game is very dialogue heavy, so having good voice acting is pretty crucial. That said, I think it's serviceable enough. But what do you actually do in this game? Gameplay in Cyberpunk is split up into two sections, walking and flying. The walking is really simple. You can walk around in either a semi-isometric view, a third-person view, or a first-person view. I personally went with first-person because I just like first-person games. But it is nice that you get options, and all of them are viable ways to play. You run around these little areas and talk to people, sometimes for the main quest, sometimes for side quests, and sometimes just so you can get a good bit of world building from them. You've also got an apartment that you can go to and buy bits of furniture for. It doesn't do anything other than give you a Steam achievement, but it is kind of nice to see the place turn from basically a closet into what can resemble a place to live. You can also pick up items that can either be used for side quests, sold, or used to upgrade your Hova. Speaking of your Hova, that's where you spend the other half of the game, driving around Nivalis and either obeying traffic laws or saying fuck it and numing your way through buildings. Honestly, there's nothing stopping you from doing the latter, though you can use the dedicated highways to give yourself a speed boost. The city is split up into different areas that you'll need to fly between, and there are loading screens. It's not egregious, but it can sometimes be annoying when you're listening to someone talking and you need to cut them off so you can drive through. It does pick up exactly where you left off when you load back in, but for me, getting footage, I'd sometimes just fly around the city for important bits of the story so I could get a good recording. Don't say I never did anything for you. But you can also upgrade your Hova, like I said. You can boost its speed, its health, and even get a couple of cosmetic upgrades. And you know, for a city where supposedly Hova crashes happen often and are devastating, I bumped into a lot of people and really just needed to go to the mechanic to get a few quick repairs. Easy peasy. Driving around does feel pretty good though. It's a bit floaty at first when you're getting used to it, but you'll learn to adjust, and honestly, it can get pretty fun just zipping and zooming your way through the city. Dodging buildings, dodging cars. Honestly, this part of the game is actually just really fun. And that's kind of it. Yeah, the gameplay is very simplistic like I said. This game is more focused on the story. So, how is it?
We need you to pick up someone again.
Oh, come on, seriously?
Alright, so this is a very story-driven game, so if you don't want to have spoilers, go here. Alright, hopefully this will be shorter than the Halo 2 one. You're a lady named Rania from the East who came to Cyberpunk NYC because capitalism wanted you as a baby. You work for Skygoth Delivery with a dude named Control telling you where to go. You go and do some deliveries and replace your car's AI with a dog. He's a good boy. You keep hearing about this thing called Cora, and you can't seem to find out exactly what it is despite your doggo having the super internet at his disposal. Also, the city just kinda sucks and there's a lot of crashes and things are breaking apart, and people think Cora is the thing that's doing it. You eventually get wrapped up with some criminal folk because the capitalism police wanted to arrest you, but they were like, nah, fuck that. They tell you to take a thing down beneath the city, and there you find something called Cora. You're like, alright, whatever, and just kinda dip out. Then you gotta make some deliveries of food to the slobs living in the vents, and there you meet a noir bot who's looking for a girl named Spaghetti. You take him around the city and then eventually drop him off and get back to working for Ariel Grunge. After a while, you hear from Noir Boy again and deliver him to a few more places before you're back to working with Atmospheric Alternative. Then it's back to Noirbot because he's found the child, so you go to pick him up. But apparently Noodle's dad doesn't really like you because you escaped the Bezos patrol. One of the criminal dudes then sets Noirbot to self-destruct, and then you have to yeet him into the underground to explode. You then take Spagoot back to your apartment, and then she lives there now before you go back to work and then get hacked by the cop dude again. But then Cora gets you out and you gotta go see her again. She then gives you her child and tells you to go meet with yourself at the top of the Dublin Spire and make a choice, so you gotta plug her into your city, and then your dog is no longer a car, but is a dog. Did that sound all over the place? Well, because it kind of is. Cloudpunk takes place thousands of years in the future in a city called Nivalis, which has been plagued by traffic accidents and sections falling into the sea more than usual, like the city itself is just falling apart. And just like with any cyberpunk game, corporations run the place. You play as Rania, a new delivery driver to Cloudpunk from the Eastern Peninsula. She's as new to the city as you are, so it does help that the both of you are kinda clueless. Throughout most of the game, you're talking to Control, the guy who dispatches delivery jobs to you, and Camus, your dog who has had his personality turned into an automata, this universe's name for an AI. Everything is pretty normal at first, but then you end up delivering a bomb, which destroys a building and sends it into the sea. Casual. But you just sort of go along with it after that, knowing that you're desperate for money. Along the way, you routinely hear about something called Cora, which is used as a lot of terms. It's used for fate, an old AI, or really just any number of things. Eventually, CorpSec, which is essentially the police force in the city, come to arrest you, but they're blown up by a crime lord named Lomo and his hacker associate Rubric. As repayment, you have to deliver something for them into an abandoned underbelly of the city. When you deliver it though, you run into an old terminal, which reveals itself to be Cora. Rania doesn't really believe it at first, so she just sort of goes on her way. You do a few more jobs before eventually needing to go to the vents, another underbelly of the city where people live off the grid, farming using the moisture in the air. As you're about to leave, you get a call from an android PI trapped in the vents named Huxley. He was apparently looking for a girl named Pashta who was taken by the Debt Corps, an organization that enforces debt collection to an extreme degree. You drive him around for a bit before dropping him off to continue hunting the trail before you're sent off to do more deliveries. Eventually, you're given a task by Control to go to a location and are instead contacted by Cora. She asks you a question about Nivalis before disappearing again. Then you go back to helping Huxley find Pashta and are contacted by an agent named Rio who tells you to surrender Huxley to you. You escape him and drop Huxley off before continuing on your way. After you do some more deliveries, you are yet again contacted by Huxley and pick him up, as he's found Pashta, finally. You pick them both up and learn that Pashta actually has incriminating evidence on her father, who turns out to be Agent Rio, and Lomo on one of her augments. Rio contacts you, but then hangs up after Pashta threatens to reveal his secrets. Lomo instead contacts you soon after, and speaks a phrase that activates Huxley's self-destruct sequence. You need to bring him into the vents to stop him, but it turns out he only brought you there so that he could die without hurting anybody around him. You take Pashta to your apartment, do a few more jobs, and then your Hova is hacked by Rio and is infected with a logic virus. Cora manages to stop it and calls you down to her, asking you to take a fragment of her on a disk drive up to the top of the spire to meet with a woman named JK, apparently your mirror, as she calls it. You meet with JK, and after a bit of talking, you have to make a decision. Replace Cora with what is effectively her daughter, or send her daughter to another city. Afterwards, you leave the spire and Control informs you that he's going away. Apparently, he's been an automata the entire time, and because of some of his meddling in order to help you, he's deleted, but he's actually thankful for it. He was actually killed years ago, but was brought back by the debt court in order to repay his debts, so he's now being released. Then you go home, wake up the next morning, and Canvas has a new dog body, courtesy of JK. And that's the end of the story. It's a bit all over the place. The story starts out very interesting, being the tale of someone from outside this dystopian city. She's struggling to get by, seeing the people oppressed by the corporations, all what you would expect in a sci-fi universe, and it's really set to be an interesting story of struggles. But then it just sort of turns into this generic Chosen One story. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with Chosen One stories, but it just seems a bit underwhelming, especially for a cyberpunk setting in a world that has a lot of potential. Now, the game does have a few points in which you can make different choices, but I don't know to what extent these actually affect the story. I can't imagine it would do much. Some of these choices seem to be extremely superficial on the surface. Even the ending seems to be a little bit of a nothing choice, since you don't really get to see the extent of the effects that your decision has on the city, since the game ends just a few minutes after. Some of the characters are interesting, and the world building is actually pretty well done through dialogue in main missions and side missions. But the overall story is just a bit underwhelming, and the lackluster voice acting for some of the characters doesn't do it any favors. I don't think the story is bad, but it's nothing to write home about. And that's really it. I know it's not nearly as in-depth as my Halo 2 review, but, well, I went a bit overboard with that one. But would I recommend this game? Honestly, I would. I know its story isn't spectacular like I said, but it's compelling enough to get through casually. It's about $20 on Steam and it takes about 10 hours to complete, so I would say it's worth the money. If nothing else, just exploring this cyberpunk city for a few hours with some nice music can be a good way to kill some time. I know this video was a short one, but the Halo 3 video is next, so stay tuned for that. I'll see you then.